Let's continue with part 2. What I'm going to do is give you 4 examples of common phrases in Spanish that trigger the subjunctive. Now, I often refer to these kinds of phrases as glue. This is something that we've come across in the course before. That's because they help glue sentences together. The first example is para que. Now, this means in order that or so that. We're already very used to using para, meaning in order to. But there are also situations, speaking situations and contexts where you'll need to use in order that or so that, in which case you'll extend it from para into para que. Now, as soon as you do that, you will trigger the subjunctive. Here's an example sentence for you. I'm going to ask for his number so I can call him later. Now, as we know, whenever the word that is implied in English, we must put it in Spanish. So this sentence becomes, I'm going to ask for his number so that I can call him later. Translated, this becomes, voy a pedirle su número para que pueda llamarle más tarde. Now, there's a lot going on in this sentence, so let's go through it. First of all, I'm going to voy a. And then to ask for information, we're going to kind of request this information. So we're using the verb pedir instead of preguntar. And we are requesting to him. So voy a pedir to him. So it becomes voy a pedirle su número. I'm going to request to him his number. Now we have in order that para que. This is our trigger, and why it goes into pueda instead of puede. Para que pueda llamarle, so that I might be able to call him or to call to him later. This is quite an advanced sentence, but hopefully you get the idea of seeing how para que, this piece of glue in order that, triggers the subjunctive. Let's look at some more examples. I need to leave now so that I can arrive on time. This becomes necesito irme ahora para que pueda llegar a tiempo. So I need to leave, necesito irme, now ahora, so that or in order that, para que I might be able, pueda llegar a tiempo. Here's another one. I'm here so that I can find out the truth. Again, you could leave the word that out in English and have it sound perfectly natural. I'm here so I can find out the truth. But because the word that is implied, in Spanish it must be put in, and that forces us into using para que, so that or in order that I can find out the truth. Translated, this becomes, estoy aquí para que pueda descubrir la verdad. Let's look at another. I stayed here so that I can help you. This becomes, me quedé para que pueda ayudarte. Here we're using the verb quedarse, to remain one's self, and we're using it in the dot past. I stayed. So, me quedé. In order that, para que, again, triggering, pueda ayudarte, so that I can help you. Try this one on your own. I'm preparing everything so that it's ready. How would you say that? Estoy preparando todo para que esté listo. Let's try one more. I'm going to write myself a note so that I don't forget to do it. The verb to forget is olvidar. So try this one. How would you translate this into Spanish? It would be, voy a escribirme una nota para que no olvide hacerlo. So we have, I'm going to write, which would be voy a escribir, but I'm going to write myself, or to myself. Voy a escribirme, a note, una nota. So that, or in order that, para que I don't forget. Now normally, olvidar would be going to olvido. Olvido is I forget. but because we've triggered the subjunctive, becomes olvide. And you could even clarify it if you wanted to, para que, or it should be here actually, para que yo no olvide hacerlo. What I hope I've demonstrated to you is that sometimes you can't just use para. It's necessary, there's no other way around it, but to use para que, because we're applying in order that, or so that I can do it, so that I can call him, in order that I can see how much it is before I buy it. There's 1,000,001 examples where para que becomes necessary. And when that happens, you're forced into using the subjunctive. The next one we'll look at is a menos que. This means unless. Now, I don't want you to get it confused with al menos, which means at least. As you can see, they are quite similar. We have a menos que and al menos. Now, al menos doesn't normally trigger the subjunctive. For example, you could say, at least I'm here on time, which would be al menos estoy aquí a tiempo. You can see we have estoy, so this is regular. Al menos did not trigger the subjunctive, so don't get them confused. The one that we're looking at here is a menos que, meaning unless. Al menos, you just treat everything normally. Let's look at some example sentences now with a menos que. We have here, I'm not going to tell him unless it's absolutely necessary. First of all, how would you say it's necessary? Es necesario. In our sentence, we have unless it's necessary, and we know that unless is going to trigger the subjunctive. Now, the next verb coming up is es. And what is the infinitive of that? What's the full verb of es? Where is it coming from? What verb? It's coming from ser. Now, ser in the subjunctive is something we haven't done yet. So let's run quickly through it now. It looks like this. Sea, seas, sea, seamos, sean. This is the verb ser in the subjunctive, and as you can see, the key sound is sea. Sea, seas, sea, seamos, and sean. If we go back to our example sentence, we're going to need to use it. Because here we have unless triggering the subjunctive. Here it is coming from the verb ser. So I wonder if you could try to work out now how you would translate this into Spanish. No voy a decirle, a menos que sea absolutamente necesario. This is a very good example of something very natural, very common in everyday language. So I'm not going to tell him, no voy a decirle, unless, a menos que, here's our trigger. So instead of es absolutamente necesario, which is fine on its own, but because we've triggered the subjunctive, it forces us into sea, which is the subjunctive of ser. Now, I don't want you to worry too much about this because we're going to do a dedicated lesson on using ser in the subjunctive. So I certainly don't expect that you will learn this right here and now, just in this one instance. We're going to be coming back to it. Let's try this one. I'm not going to start unless I'm ready. How would you say that? No voy a empezar a menos que esté listo, or if you are female, you will say lista. These last two sentences bring us to an interesting point, which we are going to cover in much more detail quite soon. You can see that this concept in Spanish of ser versus estar also runs through the subjunctive, because in one sentence we had it's absolutely necessary, which is on the ser side, so we went into sea. However, I'm not going to start unless I'm ready. Being ready, we use estar. For example, estoy listo. So that's why it went into the subjunctive side of estar. You can see that this theme in Spanish of ser or estar runs right the way through, even into the subjunctive. When you're just learning to make the differentiation between them, the key is to go back to the present tense, just like I instructed you to do earlier. Because I said, how would you say simply it's necessary in the present tense? And right away, most of you probably went to es necesario. So you knew that you were on the ser side, and that would take you into sea. Equally for this sentence, we have unless I'm ready. So you just isolate it and say, well, how would I simply say I'm ready in the present tense, which is estoy listo. So now you know that you are on the estar side, and that will push you into esté. That approach will certainly help you a lot, and we'll be doing dedicated lessons on this quite soon. Here's one more for you to try. I'm not going to do it unless they pay me. I've put the verb pagar at the bottom there to help you. So how would you say it? No voy a hacerlo a menos que me paguen. Normally it would be pagan because the verb is pagar. However, a menos que forces us into the subjunctive with this verb, me paguen. The phrase in case that is something we use a lot in our own everyday English. In Spanish, it would be en caso de que. This phrase triggers the subjunctive. I'll give you an example sentence and then a couple for you to try on your own. Look at this one. We have, I'll leave a note for him on the table in case we arrive home late. This would be, voy a dejar una nota para él en la mesa, en caso de que lleguemos tarde a la casa. First of all, we have I'll leave, which could also mean I'm going to leave. So we can use voy a dejar una nota, going to leave a note, for him, para él, and on the table, en la mesa. Now we have our trigger in case that, en caso de que. Instead of llegamos, for we arrive, it pushes us into lleguemos. In case that we arrive late home, en caso de que lleguemos tarde a la casa. So here you can see the trigger forcing the subjunctive. Let's see if you can try a couple on your own. Did you make a copy of the key in case we lose it? The verb to lose is perder, so try to say this in Spanish. ¿Hiciste una copia de la llave en caso de que la perdamos? Here we have did you make. Remember that hacer is to do or to make. So did you make a copy of the key? This is a dot past an event, right? Hiciste una copia de la llave. Now we have our trigger in case that en caso de que. Now the verb perder ends in er. So it changes sides. Instead of perdemos, it goes into perdamos. En caso de que la perdamos. La because we're referring to la llave. Let's do one more. We are buying some flowers now in case they forget to do it later. The verb to forget is olvidar. So try to translate this now. Estamos comprando unas flores ahora, en caso de que olviden hacerlo más tarde. Here we have estamos comprando. This is especially obvious because we're using now, so this is an action that's going on right now. Estamos comprando unas flores, some flowers. Now the trigger, in case that, en caso de que. Now we have olvidar, an AR verb, switching over to the other side. They forget olviden, to do it later, hacerlo más tarde. Sometimes you can avoid using the subjunctive, and this is a good example of that. We have the trigger antes de que, which is used for before. Now look at these examples. We have I always drink a glass of water before I eat, and I always drink a glass of water before eating. Is there any real difference in the meanings of those two sentences? I really don't think so. Yet one will trigger the subjunctive and the other will not. So we have siempre tomo un vaso de agua antes de que coma. Here you can see the trigger antes de que, forcing us into coma, the subjunctive. So this would be the translation of the first one here. I always drink a glass of water before I eat. However, if instead you choose to go with before eating, you can avoid the subjunctive altogether. It becomes siempre tomo un vaso de agua antes de comer. You can see that by avoiding que and simply saying before eating antes de comer, we can avoid using the subjunctive altogether. Here's another example of that for you. Before we eat, I want to say a prayer. And below it we have before eating, I want to say a prayer. Again, there's no real difference between those two sentences, yet this one triggers the subjunctive and this one does not. So we have antes de que comamos, quiero decir una oración. So we have antes de que, triggering the subjunctive comamos. But in the second one, we have before eating, antes de comer, quiero decir una oración. Here we have no subjunctive. Sometimes, however, there isn't a way around it. Look at this sentence. I'm not going to start before I'm ready. Here we can't really find a way around not using the subjunctive. So how would you say that in Spanish? No voy a empezar antes de que esté listo or lista. This one has been quite a long lesson, so let's look over what we covered. Basically, we had 4 pieces of glue in Spanish, little phrases that help you to connect sentences together. We have para que, a menos que, en caso de que, antes de que. All the way down the line, you see the trigger que, and que. The only one out here, or the odd one out, was antes de que, where if you say antes de que, if you step on it, you have to use the subjunctive. However, there's often a way to rephrase what you're saying in English, so you're not using the word que, and instead you're just saying antes de with the verb. Antes de comer, antes de hablar, whatever. So there we have a little out, a way around the subjunctive. But in all the others, we do not. As soon as you step on them, you're going to be forced into the subjunctive. So this is an example of how glue can also work as triggers for the subjunctive in Spanish.